Hello and welcome. Prigozhin's power play, his blackmail around Bachmut, is revealing fundamental weaknesses within the Russian force structure. And Russia is suffering from severe worker shortages. This and more in the Situation Report. Prigozhin declared that the Russian Ministry of Defense is now delivering the required weapons and ammunition to him. That's why, because of that, he will keep staying in Bachmut. Surovikin is now going to be an intermediary between the two sides, so between the Ministry of Defense and Wagner, which clearly shows us how independent Wagner is, that they simply can't be ordered, that they are more or less talking eye to eye with the Russian side by having someone to negotiate between the two sides. De facto, we can say that Wagner said, that Prigozhin said, Wagner will be retreating from Bachmut was nothing short of blackmail. It wasn't the first time he announced it, but this was the first time where he actually set a date until which he will have withdrawn, but it clearly was just blackmail. Before that, Kadyrov has sent a letter to Putin asking for Putin's permission to replace Wagner inside of Bachmut. Also, that shows if Wagner can declare its retreat and Kadyrov can write to Putin to ask for the permission to replace them, it shows that the traditional force structures from the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff inside of Russia, so basically Gerasimov and Shoigu, have no control over the totality of the armed forces that are fighting in Ukraine. This shows fundamental weaknesses, as in case of harsh situations, be it offensive or defensive, the coordination will be close to non-existent or at least massively inadequate, and this will allow the Ukrainians to exploit it. You can imagine it in a way that when a front line is divided between Wagner or between Kadyrov and traditional armed forces, if the Ukrainians identify it and attack at the seam of them, they have a chance that one of the two will not come to the aid of the others, either because its command structure is independent, so the attacked side cannot simply order the others to help them, or because there are even animosities between the two of them, which leads to one side not willing to sacrifice own personnel and own material for the others that are even like opponents within the own side. All of it shows how weak the force structure inside of the Russian armed forces is, inside of the Russian combatants is, and it allows us the question how efficient Russian defensive and offensive operations will be in the near future. When we come to the front line north of the Seversky Donetsk, we have some reports about fighting close to Dvorichna. There were at least two attacks in the direction of Snikivka. They have achieved nothing, and the Russians are claiming at Novomlinsk that they destroyed some Ukrainians there. I'm not completely sure if they claimed that they fired over the river and destroyed them on the other side, or if they claim that the Ukrainians crossed the river. But no territorial change here whatsoever. There was some reports of skirmishes at Novoselivske, but basically the front line seems to both be stable and settled now. Even south, where we usually would hear Dibrova here and the Serebryanska forest, Bryaska, I think, I'm not completely sure. The forest here, where usually the fighting was happening, there are no specific reports about bigger attacks. That obviously doesn't necessarily mean the front line is stable and completely quiet, but that means the bigger attacks have stopped by the Russians. South of the Seversky Donetsk, it's still a little bit different. We have reports of Russian attacks towards Bilohorivka. The Ukrainians have defeated them, and the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying that the Ukrainians attacked from Bilohorivka in the direction of Lysychansk, but they defeated this. There's no confirmation whatsoever in this regard. In Spirne, we have reports about Russian attacks, and the Russians were somewhat successful at Sako I Venseti up here. They gained some minor tactical positions there. Closer to Bachmut, there are reports from Russian attacks on Bodanivka in the direction of Bodanivka, and the Russians are reporting a Ukrainian counterattack in Kromove in the direction here. Whether this counterattack has achieved anything, I cannot confirm. Inside of Bakhmut, the Russian advance is continuing. It seems to be clear that in the northern part, they have full control of the eastern side of the T0504 highway, which is this one here, crossing through Bakhmut. I cannot confirm yet that they have entered the so-called citadel here outside on the western side of the road. This is the last remaining focus point for the Ukrainian defense, as it is high rises that have control over the surrounding areas. It still seems to be mostly under Ukrainian control. Wagner's Prigozhin is claiming that the Ukrainian control over Bakhmut is now reduced to 2.4 square kilometers, what is that, like 1.5 square miles, more or less, around this area. Might actually be 1 square mile, more or less. Regardless of this, while there is still Ukrainian presence in Bakhmut, we can confirm that the Russians ever so slowly are creeping forward, but they are creeping forward. Bakhmut's time seems to be seems to be on the clock. The Russians are still trying to perform a turning maneuver or even encircle the Ukrainians around the south as well, not just by attacking Bodanivka, but we also have reports about attacks on Ivanivske and in the direction of Stupochki. This would allow them to cut the T0504 road, which is the last remaining road to supply the forces in Bakhmut, mostly going here and then probably moving somewhere over here and maybe something over the dirt here. But this is the last way for the Ukrainians to supply their defenders. They are being attacked here, but as so far, the Ukrainians are able to hold the line. Further south, we have reports of several days in a row now attacks on New York. Where exactly they are coming from, I cannot confirm. Whether it's attacking north here or out of the direction of Horlivka. Just New York is mentioned. Whether it's from the east or the south, I cannot confirm. Avdiivka fighting is also continuing. We have reports of fighting close to Novobakhmutivka in the direction of Novokalinove, also Pervomaiske and Severne. But this time the Ukrainians did a counterattack at Vodiane and they did capture some territory. They recaptured some of the territory, but again we are talking about a tactical advance, a few hundred meters at best, somewhere here in the tree lines, so nothing of any strategic importance, and you could even doubt whether it has any tactical importance whatsoever. But they still have had some success, whereas on other places the front is more or less stable. There's fighting reported from Marinka, no change on the control here, and the rest of the front line down here is more or less quiet when it comes to Russian attacks, but the Russians are reporting reconnaissance and force attacks along the front line in western Donetsk, so it should be around here where the Ukrainians did reconnaissance attacks. This whole is continuing on the southern area here in Zaporizhzhia. There are reports of Russians claiming that they destroyed sabotage groups. Now, whether that actually means it's a few guys that were willing or intending to infiltrate through the lines into the Russian rear, that is quite possible, especially in preparation of an offensive. To have troops in the rear to sabotage, blow up, do reconnaissance, etc., would make a lot of sense. But it's also quite possible that this was a reconnaissance in force or reconnaissance attack to probing the front line, finding out weak points. Whatever it is, we have an increased Ukrainian activity here along the front line in Zaporizhzhia over the last few weeks that is obviously leading to the anticipated counteroffensive, even though the big attacks where you would expect somebody to blow the whistle and the guys jumping out of the trench, we are nowhere at this yet, even though you could argue that the current shaping of the battlefield can already be called the start of the offensive. Further west, we have reports of shelling in Kherson Oblast, but the most interesting part is that the Kakhovka Dam is now refilling rapidly. In the past, we had reports of the Kakhovka Dam losing more and more water, which led to some suspicion that maybe the Russians damaged something when they blew up the road bridge here to stop the Ukrainians from using it to enter the southern part of Kherson. This is now being proven false, as now the dam is filling up massively, and according to what I find here, it's after a record low level. Now it's at a record high level, meaning that they barely let any water out right now. This will obviously allow them to use the water to some advantage in case of Ukrainian amphibious activity over the in case of Ukrainian bridging activity here over the southern part of the estuary of the Dnipro, by either releasing water or even blowing up the dam and flooding the whole area in that case. Generally, we have to say it's clearly the calm before the storm. The Russian offensive, except for Bachmut, has culminated. We still have some activity around Avdiivka. It seems unlikely that it will achieve anything whatsoever. So more or less, we can say the Russian forces have culminated and the Ukrainians have not attacked yet. So we are in anticipation of the coming Ukrainian counteroffensive. There was a report from a Kinshal being shot down a few days ago. There were pictures showing, and increasingly there's more doubt coming up because the pictures that were shown didn't show any deep penetration into the ground, which you would expect from a Kinshal, from a ballistic missile being shot down basically from a missile going several times the speed of sound. Even if it doesn't detonate, it should do some damage to the ground. But while it is possible that the missile, that the wreckage had been moved and was just taken after being moved or after being collected, the doubt still remains. Generally, though, we can say that the Patriot is theoretically able to shoot down the Kinshal missile. The ballistic missiles, for instance, the Scud or anything like this, are flying at hypersonic speeds, so Mach 5 and higher. And the Patriot is generally capable of intercepting them, even though far from 100% success rate. So if the Kinshal is not anything different in this regard. The Kinshal is being marketed as a hypersonic missile, which there is actually some doubt in the Western Front whether it truly is one, because hypersonic weapon would include not just the speed, but the fact that it moves while being in the final approach. That would make it much more difficult to intercept, as obviously usually an intercept course is calculated and it's basically shot with some kind of lead. The interceptor is shot with some kind of lead, which only works if the missile that is supposed to be intercepted is continuing on its flight path. So while the speed is not an issue, the maneuvering usually is. It might still be a possibility that it hasn't maneuvered too much. And so if the Kinshal didn't maneuver too much, then it might have been intercepted because of that. If it was an intercept, generally there's some possibility of a Kinshal very well being intercepted if it's not moving too much. But if it is a real hypersonic weapon, and there is actually some doubt to that, then the maneuvering will make it extremely difficult and thus the interception rate extremely low. Still, though, that's not a proof in any regards. I just wanted to confirm or to let you know of the doubts of the Kinshal interception that are currently spreading. So whether that was actually an intercept by a Patriot or not is unclear as of now. From the Russian side now, we have confirmation that the bridge over the Kerch Strait was actually blocked. We had in the last situation report, I mentioned that it indicates that it's blocked, but that it could be due to electronic warfare. The Russian side has now confirmed it, that the road was actually blocked, but now it's reopened. There are reports, though, that they increased massively the checkpoints on the leading up to the bridge on both sides to prevent another attack by the Ukrainians like the first time. Also, there's reports from the Russian side that 23 drones were used on an attack on the Crimea, supposedly started from Odessa. The Russians are saying they shot down 22 of them on the 6th to the 7th of May. The drones were 22 Mugin 5, which is a commercial drone from China, and one Tupolev 141. This is the reconnaissance drone from the Cold War, one of which was used against Engels Air Force Base some time ago. Other reports are saying, though, that out of those 23 23 drones, all of them were shot down, and I have no confirmation of a specific drone damage on the ground. So it's possible that the final one was also shot down, as initially said when they launched 23 and they say 22 were shot down, then one should have gone through. But it's possible that none has reached its target. I cannot confirm that. There was an attack on the life of Sakhar Prilepin in Nizhny Novgorod on the 6th of May. He was injured in both his legs, but his driver and bodyguard died. He is a famous writer and politician inside of Russia who has also fought on the Donbas side, on the Russian side in Donbas war. The Russians are claiming the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence agency, is responsible for the attempt on Sakhar Prilepin's life. Atesh, though, which is the Crimean Tatar resistance group, you could call them guerrilla or guerrilla or partisans, they have taken responsibility. They claim it was them who tried to kill Prilepin. When it comes to the fourth generation, Russia is now feeling the burn, as you would call, feeling the pain. The Russian Central Bank has done a survey among 14,000 companies, and they say it's the worst lack of workers since 1998. The British Ministry of Defense is believing emigration, COVID, and the war have reduced the working population by 2 million men inside of Russia. This doesn't necessarily mean that Russia is running out of workers, though, as Russia has still yet to take measures to control the flow of workers. Meaning right now, basically, you still have a fully functional civilian sector, whereas the defense companies are competing with the civilian sector with salaries and with exemptions from a potential mobilization. So the game is kind of rigged for the defense industries, but there's no force as of yet. What could obviously be done from the Russian side, but where the Russian government is still hesitant to do it, as it would be an admission of them fighting a serious war, and it would affect the Russian population, they could still turn to something like a total war, basically restricting the civilian workforce and forcing them to switch jobs. As a simple example, you can imagine them right now that they might be producing, for instance, coffee machines that you can obviously order that company to close down or to reduce its staff by half and use the workers that are freed this way to put them in the tank factories to work there instead. Russia has not taken any measures of this like this yet, as obviously the political establishment wants to keep up the impression that this is not a serious war, that to leave the population alone as far as possible as they can. But Russia still has the potential to address potential worker shortages by using more drastic measures in the future. So it should not be completely over-interpreted that Russia will no longer be able to produce goods of war because they are running out of workers. The pool of workers is being reduced, and thus the competition has been increased, but government has measures to address this. When it comes to international support, we have reports here from Croatia that the Croatia is delivering 14 Mi-8 transport helicopters. 9 of them have flown to Ukraine already. The rest is being delivered. Mi-8 is the helicopter you see in the background, able to transport troops, but also it can have weapon pods on its wings, especially, and we've seen the Ukrainians use them in the past with S-8 unguided rockets used in a ballistic arc close to the front line to basically lob them over the front line onto Russian positions. So they are not just transport helicopter being able to used for all theoretic opportunities, all theoretic missions of a transport helicopter. They can also be used for attack missions as well. 14 of those are being handed from Croatia to Ukraine. And there is now confirmed radar systems from Israel in Ukraine. 16 such radars are there. This is another example of Israeli tech appearing on Ukraine's side. So far, we have not really much confirmation of weaponry. I think there were some mortar grenades that have appeared, but mostly the aid is non-offensive, as you would call it, more a defensive measurement. But it should be expected that the export of a radar system like this needs the confirmation of the government. So the Israeli government is willing to help Ukraine, at least to a certain degree, even in military matters as well. And what we have here, not identified by me, but according to them, this is Pakistani 155 millimeter rounds in a M109 howitzer being used here. Pakistan, again, weaponry from Pakistan appearing on the Ukrainian side. Pakistan is cash strapped, so they are obviously willing to sell weaponry and ammunition to other nations, which then make sure that those weaponry, those ammunitions end up in Ukraine. It's suspected that the Pakistani government is selling it to the US in exchange for hard cash, which they are desperately in need of, and Ukraine is receiving the weaponry afterwards. We have also pictures and videos here of the Ukrainians doing exercises for river crossing. You can see here, this is a bridging element, basically a pontoon, which can be either connected with others to create a floating bridge, or it can be propelled with boats like here to make it more or less a ferry this way. This is now being done in Ukrainian exercises, and we have this video here of Ukrainians training the same thing with the PTS-2 amphibious vehicles, where they train both with light vehicles as well as with infantry for crossing of rivers, of water, bodies of water. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to cross over the Dnipro, but obviously having published those pictures, that's at least the impression they want to make upon the Russians, that it's a real possibility that they are going to cross the Dnipro here, as this threat will mean the Russians have more fronts to worry about, can be less certain where exactly the attack will happen, which will lead to them spreading out their forces even more. And at the same time, the Ukrainians might still cross over the Dnipro, depending on how the situation along the front line is and how their reconnaissance, their intel delivers them information where exactly the Russian forces are. And we have an interesting video here. This is actually a Tochka U, supposedly a current video. A Tochka U being used in Ukraine. Now, this is special in some way, as it's the first Tochka U usage that is being reported in months. Ukraine had a little over 100 Tochka U at the beginning of the war. They've been used extensively since then. For example, in the first few days, one was used against a Russian Air Force base, destroying planes on the ground. They were also used in the harbor of Berdyansk, destroying amphibious assault ships there, landing ships there. The Tochka U has been in massive use, and it was kind of a surprise that supposedly some are still available. Maybe they have been refurbished. Maybe the video is just older. I cannot really confirm it, but it was somewhat surprising to me. And finally, we have a report here of a Polish plane that a turbojet, turboprop that was harassed by a Russian Su-35. Turbulences led it to lose altitude. It was over the Black Sea, and the plane wasn't even from the armed forces. It was from the border guards. But the interesting part is they claim it was 20.5 kilometers away from the Romanian border, even though this is obviously at 20.6 away from the Romanian airspace. So this was here, somewhere here in the southwestern Black Sea. No, this is Romania. Somewhere here in the southwestern Black Sea, nowhere close to Crimea. Basically, the Russians were flying around somewhere here, harassing NATO planes. This is obviously quite provocative and can lead to some incidences that may escalate the war further. So highly irresponsible actions by the Russian side, or at least by the Russian pilot here. We've had the example where a Russian pilot misunderstood an order from the ground and launched an air-to-air missile on a British reconnaissance plane. Luckily, the missile or the pilot were so faulty that it didn't lead to any consequences, but it was actually a Russian plane opening fire on a NATO plane in international airspace, which could have led to an escalation. But there, the judgment was that this pilot was a moron, badly trained apparently, and didn't understand what the ground crew wanted, what his commander wanted. So he erroneously, I think it's called, like in error, he launched the missile, not as a hostile act by the state of Russia itself. Whether it might have been something like this again is unknown, but it would be highly provocative and highly unprofessional as well. That was already that was already it from me for now. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment for the algorithm or what do you think about the whole situation and about the Russian behavior in regards to the Polish plane. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much for supporting it so far, for everyone already supporting it. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.